By tradition, then, Coriolanus would be for the patricians, against the plebeians, and for the monarchy. I may have fucked that up. Let me take a look at that. Okay, hey everybody. This is our video discussion of Coriolanus. Now, unlike Titus Andronicus, which was also a play, a cautionary tale of that early Roman devotion to honor, Coriolanus does have some basis in historical fact, we think. This was probably taken, a lot of it, from material found in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, which presented descriptions of the lives of ancient Greeks that the Romans admired, and paralleled their lives with ancient Romans that the ancient Romans admired. This was a Roman attempt to make the Romans look as awesome as the Greeks, because the Romans recognized that the Greeks were awesome. So there you go. Parallel Lives was written around the year 100, and it was translated into French at some point, many hundreds of years later, and then translated into English around 1579, and it's from the English version, most likely, that Shakespeare takes most of his material. Coriolanus, the play, opens in the year 494 BCE. This is only about 15 years or so after the expulsion of the Tarquin monarchy and the establishment of the Roman Republic. Now, it's important to understand the social classes that we had in ancient Rome. The patricians were the aristocrats, and it was the patricians who ousted the monarchy and insisted on representative government for themselves. They didn't honestly give a shit about the plebeians or the slaves or anyone else in Rome except for their own little social class. I'm so glad times have changed and that the wealthy in the United States of America in the 21st century care so much about the rest of us, unlike the patricians. Wait, was that too ironic? It was. That was too ironic, so forget I said that part. The common folk in Rome were the plebeians, and the lot of the plebeians actually was worse under the patricians than it had been under the monarchy. The patricians expected the plebeians to grow the food for them and to fight their wars for them and to do the labor for them, but get little to nothing in return. When the plebeians went off to fight wars instigated by the patricians, there was no care taken at all to safeguard the plebeians' families or households or jobs or anything like that. So a plebeian was told, go off to war, fight and possibly die for your country. And the plebeian would go, and if the plebeian didn't die, he would return to find that his company, or his country I should say, wow, that was a Freudian slip, wasn't it? To find that his country didn't give a damn about him. So the plebeians, things were not that good for them under the patricians in ancient Rome. Also, the patricians squeezed the plebeians economically. As noted, they had the plebeians grow all the crops for them, and then they took these from the plebeians and sold them back to the plebeians at outrageous prices. So the plebeians pretty much got screwed on every front. Coriolanus is a patrician. His birth name is Caius Marcius, and he is from an old family. His ancestor is Ancus Marcius. I may be mangling that name, but please forgive me. Ancus Marcius was the fourth king of Rome, lo in the distant past, and, according to Plutarch, Ancus Marcius established the Senate, a group of 100 representatives who would provide input to the king and vote on laws and stuff, and generally safeguard the interests of the patricians. However, for whatever reason, Ancus Marcius was succeeded not by a member of his family, but by a member of the Tarquin family. And the Tarquins wanted nothing at all to do with the Senate, which irritated the patricians no end. By tradition, then, Caius Marcius, the future Coriolanus, would be against the Tarquin monarchy, for the patricians, and against the plebeians. Furthermore, according to Plutarch, Caius Marcius was an extraordinarily unpleasant fellow. This is, I'm told, a quotation from Plutarch, and it's about Caius Marcius. Quote, "He was so choleric and impatient that he would yield to no living creature, which made him churlish, uncivil, and altogether unfit for any man's conversation." Also, according to Plutarch, Caius Marcius's father died when he was very young, and so Caius Marcius was raised by his mother. Got a quotation about that as well. Touching Marcius, the only thing that made him to love honor was the joy he saw his mother did take of him, for he thought nothing made him so happy and honorable as that his mother might hear everyone praise and commend him, that she might always see him return with a crown upon his head, and that she might still embrace him with tears running down her cheeks for joy. So, in short, Caius Marcius is unpleasant, arrogant, devoted to honor, and has mommy issues. Sounds like a fun guy, doesn't he? As the play opens, the plebeians are very close to rioting in the streets because there is a food shortage, at least for them. Also, the Volscians are preparing to attack Rome. So, the Senate asks Caius Marcius, who has a great reputation as a general, to fight off the Volscians. Caius Marcius does this, serving as a general under Cominius. Cominius is one of the two consuls of Rome. The consuls were, in short, twin kings. They were elected for 1-year terms. When Caius Marcius, perhaps taking a little too much credit, defeats the Volscians at the city of Coriolanus, he takes the name Coriolanus in honor of his victory at Act 1, Scene 9, around line 63. Now, because of the now named Coriolanus' victory, there is talk of making him one of the consuls in Act 2, Scene 1. However, because of Coriolanus' arrogance and his hostility toward the plebeians, the two tribunes, Sicinius and Brutus, they're not resting easy with this notion of Coriolanus becoming a consul. The tribunes were the two representatives of the plebeians in the Senate. And keep in mind that then, as now, the aristocratic class was incredibly tiny compared to everybody else, the plebeians and the slaves. And yet in the Senate of 100 or more people, 98 of those represent the small patrician class, and 2, the tribunes, represent everybody else. In Act 3, Scene 1, Coriolanus rants against the plebeians, asserting they should have absolutely no place and no voice in the government. Well, this is exactly the sort of thing that Brutus and Sicinius don't like about Coriolanus, among other things. And in Act 3, Scene 3, Brutus and Sicinius act to have Coriolanus banished from Rome by inciting both the plebeians and the Senate against him. His sense of honor thereby offended, Coriolanus allies himself with the Volscian general Aufidius and prepares to attack Rome. Because, as we know, a leader who has tremendous resources and power absolutely should use his office to seek revenge against people that he feels have personally offended him, despite the cost to the nation state in such a personal, petty vendetta. Sticking pretty close to what Plutarch writes, Shakespeare's play seems to be not quite, but more or less balanced between political issues and personal issues. Political issues include the notion of order versus disorder. Can the aristocrats really be trusted to depend or to look out for anyone's interests but their own? Can the plebeians be trusted to have any part in making sound decisions in the government? And do the ends justify the means, either in a personal or a broader sense? There are basically two personal issues, and they run through the play. One, what happens to someone, and what does someone do to everyone around him, when that someone is so single-mindedly devoted to honor? This is something that Shakespeare gets at and criticizes in a number of his plays, this single-minded devotion to honor and the horrible things that someone who is overly concerned with honor will do. Another personal issue, Caius Marcius, we see, was raised by his mother, and it wasn't exactly a healthy relationship. Because of this, Marcius never emotionally grew up. He remains a spoiled, willful mama's boy who wants what he wants and doesn't care what anyone else wants or experiences as a result of his desires. So what happens when we have a powerful leader with the emotional control and the self-centeredness of, say, an 11-year-old? Again, thank God we don't have to deal with anything like that now. Other things. Is Coriolanus a tragic hero in the classical sense? Well, he has some of those characteristics that Aristotle said a tragic hero should have. He is of a high social status. He certainly has an internal flaw, and that's going to be his arrogance, his honor. But is Coriolanus anywhere in the middle of the moral continuum? Because remember, according to Aristotle, the tragic hero must have fundamentally good intentions. There must be something positive about the individual, yet the individual suffers from hamartia, that tragic flaw that ruins the rest of him. Well, is there anything good about Coriolanus? Dunno. How do we feel about Coriolanus by the play's end? When he falls, do we experience those two emotions that Aristotle said the audience should experience at watching the downfall of the tragic hero? Do we fear for his imminent fall? Do we pity him when he does fall? If the answer to those questions is, yeah, no, not so much, then maybe Coriolanus is not a tragic hero. Maybe he's just tragic. Maybe this isn't a play about the fate of someone who tries to do good but is tripped up in his or her effort by internal defects. Maybe instead this is a play about what happens when someone who is in the ranks of the powerful yet suffers from tremendous personality defects is given too much power. What happens when someone is admired and elevated to high station because the individual does things that traditionally are seen as manly and Roman, and yet no consideration is taken for the individual's personality or emotional frailty? Well, the answer to what happens is not very much that's good. How do other characters feel about Coriolanus? How does his wife, Virgilia, feel about him? And does Virgilia relate to the word virgin at all? I'm not sure. If it does, could Shakespeare be implying that Coriolanus and Virgilia never consummated their marriage? Does Coriolanus seem like a guy you'd want to tumble with? And if they didn't, then where does the child come from? Could Shakespeare be implying, through Virgilia's name, that she is a virgin, and that Coriolanus is so vile of a human being that Virgilia hasn't even had sex with him? Don't know. My guess is probably not, but I think it's an interesting question. How do the plebeians feel about Coriolanus? Well, initially they despise him, right? And then later they're more or less for him, and then they end up fearing him. How do the other patricians feel about Coriolanus? How about Aufidius? What's going on with the love-hate thing that he has with Coriolanus? With all these unanswered questions, all these problematic areas, How does this play hold up as a play? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it, can't decide? Do we enjoy reading it? Would we enjoy seeing it performed? There have been, or there has been at least one relatively recent film version of Coriolanus. I think it was modernized. I haven't seen it, but I guess I should. But I will say that a play that doesn't seem like it would be very engaging, as you read it, can be actually very engaging when you see it. The Winter's Tale, I think, is the primary example of this. I hate reading The Winter's Tale. As something to read, I think it sucks. And I figured that it would be terrible in performance, but I have seen a performance of it, and it was very engaging. Who would have thunk it? Maybe Coriolanus is like that too. Maybe not. Act 1, Scene 1, and Act 2, Scene 1, the plebeians see many flaws in Marcius, the chief of which is pride. In fact, in Act 1, Scene 1, one of the citizens asserts that Caius Marcius is, quote, chief enemy to the people because of his arrogance and his pride. Another citizen, though, thinks that his flaws are excusable because they are, quote, in his nature, end quote. In Act 1, Scene 1, Brutus tells us that he thinks that Caius Marcius will blame his commander, Cominius, for anything that goes wrong, and yet will take credit for anything that goes right, even if he had nothing to do with it. In other words, Brutus thinks that Caius Marcius craves glory even if he doesn't earn it. Act 1, Scene 2, around line 12, we see that, or we hear that, actually the plebeians hate Caius Marcius even more than they hate Aufidius, who is the Volscian general that they're supposed to fear. By Act 2, Scene 1, around line 200 or so, Coriolanus, having won a great victory, has become the people's darling. All of a sudden, the plebeian opinion of him just switches. Again, thank goodness we've moved beyond that, and the public opinion of people doesn't, go back and forth like the wind anymore. Brutus and Sicinius, however, think that this is not going to last because they feel that Coriolanus's contempt for the people is going to come out sooner rather than later. His real nature will be revealed, which is that he's an arrogant son of a bitch, and the people will turn against him. In fact, in the first 30 lines or so of Act 2, Scene 1, we have a couple of characters who are debating Coriolanus's worthiness. One is asserting that, well, he is arrogant and he's dangerous, but he's effective and therefore awesome. The other guy is not so sure about that. Act 2, Scene 2, around line 150, Brutus and Sicinius are pretty sure that Coriolanus will just continue treating the common people like dirt, because that's his attitude of them. In Act 3, Scene 1, around line 330, Menenius, or Menenius, let's just call him Melvin, defends Coriolanus's personality and his flaws by attributing them to the experiences that he had while growing up. However, is defending these things appropriate? Are these flaws, is this a personality that will make an effective leader, an effective guardian, steward for the Roman state and its people? Then we get a super weird thing in Act 4, Scene 5. Two serving men, not even knowing who Coriolanus is, are amazed by him and his awesomeness, and they assert he is, quote, simply the rarest in the world. Let's talk about the play's attitude toward the common people. Now, it's not really kind toward them, which may partly explain the play's relatively unknown status in Shakespeare's canon, at least in the 20th and the 21st century. Several places in Act 1, Scene 1, Caius Marcius shows his attitude toward the common folk. He despises them. In fact, he even asserts that sending them off to die in war is a good thing because it'll kill them. He predicts also that compromising with the plebeians now will just create greater problems in the future. Act 1, Scene 9. Caius Marcius momentarily appears to show nobility when he asks for the enlargement, the freedom of a poor man that he had captured. But not only does he promptly forget the man's name, he forgets about the entire incident because he's concerned with getting another cup of wine. So this suggests that Caius Marcius made this gesture only because it would make him look good. It would make him look honorable and noble. We could go on and list various passages in the play that show Coriolanus's disdain toward the common folk, but frankly, I don't want to spend the whole video just doing that, so we'll move on. It is worth pointing out, though, the episode in Act 2 when Coriolanus absolutely does not want to show his battle wounds to the common folk. This is a thing that it was expected a victorious general would do. He would show to the common people the injuries he received while protecting Rome. Coriolanus does not want to do that. He feels that it is beneath him to have to show anything to the common people. And then in Act 3, Coriolanus proclaims his hatred not only of the plebeians, but of the tribunes who represent them, asserting that the plebeians should have no part in government and the tribunes should have also no part in government. So now we get to the uncomfortable question. Even though Coriolanus is certainly shown to be a jackass, does Shakespeare want us to agree with his assessment of the plebeians, of the common folk? One moment, please. Does Shakespeare want us to agree with Coriolanus's assessment of this cat? There are various places in the play that show the common folk to be absolute morons, fickle idiots, and they are referred to in stage directions as a rabble. That doesn't sound very positive, and certainly if I referred to this cat as an idiot or as rabble, she would murder me forthwith, because as a cat, she has that power and she wants us all to know it. Kiss me. Right, go on, get out of here. We're doing Shakespeare, cat. Stop that. So if Shakespeare is showing the crowd to be fickle and idiots, does that mean he wants us to agree with Coriolanus' assessment of them? And if he does, then what does that do to our assessment of Coriolanus? This issue gets into that whole notion of authorial intent, actually. The notion of, or the question of, to what degree should we take the intentions of the author into consideration as we are assessing or even reacting to a work? I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that, but I don't. I think we should take the author's intent into consideration in some degree, but also the work is its own thing, right? Regardless of what the author intended, the work does what it does, and people react to it as they react to it. We react to it as we react to it, regardless of what the author intended. So, I don't know, it's a sticky wicket, and probably will continue to be one. Regarding the attitude toward the common folk, my own hunch, based upon how Shakespeare portrays them in other plays, is that Shakespeare does feel the common people are, quite frankly, a bunch of fickle idiots. But that nonetheless Coriolanus's hostility toward them is unreasonable, is too much.
Okay, let's spend some time thinking about how the play presents this Roman idea of honor. Act 1, Scene 1, Caius Marcius sees Aufidius as essentially a worthy adversary, and he doesn't disguise his envy of Aufidius's nobility. Act 1, Scene 6, Caius Marcius says he thinks a person should fear, quote, an ill report more than they should fear death. Act 1, Scene 9. Caius is to be rewarded for his accomplishments in defeating the Volscians at Coriolanus, but he refuses to take any of the spoils of war except for the horse belonging to his general, Cominius. This is interesting because the horse is not just a horse, it's the very symbol of leadership. And so Caius is taking this symbol of leadership from his general, Cominius, as well as taking a new name, Coriolanus. So, yeah, Caius is refusing any of the spoils of war except for his general's horse and his new name. Refusing the other spoils does not make him humble. Act 3, Scene 1, around line 260. It's asserted that Coriolanus is simply, quote, too noble for this world. Is he, or is he just a jerk? In Act 4, Scene 6, everyone is afraid that Coriolanus is going to attack Rome and kill everybody in it. And Cominius asserts that no one can ask for mercy. It's an interesting assertion. Because did all of these people actually wrong Coriolanus? And when Cominius says that no one can ask for mercy, is this because he truly feels no one is worthy of asking for mercy? Or is it because he knows Coriolanus would simply refuse mercy and just kill everybody? Well, the answer is the second one. In Act 5, Scene 1, we learn that Cominius feels Coriolanus, because of his devotion, his inflexible, crazy-ass view of Roman honor, Coriolanus will kill everybody in Rome because that's what an honorable man would do. In Act 5, Scene 3, when Volumnia, Coriolanus' mother, is trying to convince Coriolanus not to kill everybody, note how she does it. She points out the negative impact that killing everybody would have on Coriolanus' own reputation. In other words, she can't say, Coriolanus, wouldn't it be bad to, fucking kill everybody just because you're angry? Instead, she has to say, oh, Coriolanus, think of how poorly it would reflect on you if you were to just kill everybody. So Coriolanus' own self-centeredness is still his thing. That's the only thing he responds to, and the notion of how honorable he will appear or not appear. Not everybody in the play has such a bizarre devotion to honor at all costs. In Act 1, Aufidius states that he will forego honor if that's what he has to do in order to defeat Coriolanus. In Act 4, in going to Aufidius, Coriolanus is doing the very thing that, back in Act 1, his honor would not permit him to do. Coriolanus seems to have what we might call incidental honor or contextual honor. His honor changes depending upon the situation. It's a bit like the notion of situational ethics, the idea that we do what is right depending on what the moment suggests is right. We don't have any sort of core of right and wrong. Coriolanus and his mom. Coriolanus's obsession with Roman honor is crazy and destructive and ridiculous, but we can see how he comes by it, because this was instilled in him by his mother Volumnia. Act 1, Scene 3, Volumnia makes it known that she cares for her son's honor more than anything else, even more than for his life. In Volumnia's mind, a bloody battle is the best thing for a man. Act 1, Scene 3, around line 58, Coriolanus' son has torn up a butterfly. With his teeth, he's just enraged and tears this little butterfly to bits. He sounds like a vicious brat, but Volumnia and Valeria praise him for it. In Act 2, Scene 1, we learn Coriolanus is wounded. Virgilia is afraid for Coriolanus. She's concerned because he is wounded. But Volumnia is pleased by it. She's happy that Coriolanus has sustained injuries in battle. And keep in mind, this is many centuries before penicillin. Any wound could become infected and murder the hell out of you. In Act 2, Scene 1, starting around line 197, Volumnia asserts that she has now seen everything that she cares for. Her life is fulfilled. Obviously, then, she only cares about honor and glory. Yet in Act 3, Scene 2, even Volumnia asserts that Coriolanus himself is just too damned inflexible. Act 5, Scene 6, in several places, Coriolanus is enraged at being called a boy by Aufidius. This is interesting, because his rage at this suggests, does it not, that he really is still a boy emotionally. He has never grown up except in body. Earlier we mentioned Act 2, Scene 2 and Act 2, Scene 3, the scenes in which Coriolanus expresses his disgust at having to show his battle wounds to the plebeians. This is something that traditionally a Roman hero would do. That's just expected. But Coriolanus despises the plebeians so much, he thinks he is so above them that he just won't do it. And notice that he gets away without actually having to do it. This is key to Coriolanus here. Something that everyone has acknowledged as appropriate, even honorable, Coriolanus himself feels he is just too honorable to do. He's too honorable to do the honorable thing. It's pretty kind of honorable, isn't it? In Act 2, Scene 3, notice that one of the citizens asserts that if Coriolanus could simply don the, quote, gown of humility, then he would be great. This passage suggests that the common folks, while they may admire Coriolanus's honor and his nobility, also recognize that some degree of humility is required in someone who would be a leader. In Act 2, Scene 3, in fact, Menenius, or Menenius, I guess we decided to call him Melvin, is trying to convince Coriolanus to just go along with this one damn thing. But Coriolanus is so inflexible and so just unreasonable that even Menenius just gives up in disgust and leaves. And then when Coriolanus is with the common folks, he shows the absolute bare minimum of courtesy that he can. He is kinda sorta going through the motions of showing his battle wounds, although he doesn't actually do it, and he's plainly disgusted by the whole thing. Coriolanus wants nothing but honor, and he wants honor completely on his own terms. He will listen to nothing and no one else. The conversation between the two officers in Act 2, Scene 2 may give us the most honest, realistic description of the situation that Coriolanus finds himself in. Neither flattery nor ingratitude is the appropriate attitude for the consuls to display toward the common people. Let's spend a little time here near the end of the lecture talking about some other characters. Brutus and Sicinius are the tribunes, and they are supposed to speak for the common people. They don't like Coriolanus, they recognize him as a danger to the common folk, and so they seek to sabotage his becoming a consul. In Act 2, Scene 1, Menenius goes on about what creepy guys Brutus and Sicinius are. Is this supposed to make us feel that they are creepy guys and to condemn them for their destructive plan for Coriolanus? In Act 2, Scene 1, we learn that Brutus and Sicinius fear that if Coriolanus becomes a consul, they, Brutus and Sicinius, will lose their positions as tribunes. Well, that suggests that they are not completely self-disinterested in this situation. Yet they also appear truly to understand the, quote, ancient malice, end quote, between the plebeians and the patricians. In Act 2, Scene 2, despite Menenius's earlier, description of Brutus and Sicinius as, creepy and sort of, backhanded dudes. The tribunes are pretty forthright in expressing their reservations about Coriolanus, but Menenius, Melvin, dismisses their concerns as irrelevant just right away. Also in Act 2, Scene 3, Brutus tells us that he thinks that the present moment, going ahead and having the plebeians revolt toward Coriolanus, would be better than waiting for the larger, much more destructive rebellion that he feels inevitably would come were Coriolanus to be made a consul. Okay, I want to read this little passage word for word here so I don't get it wrong. This is Act 4, Scene 2, around line 32 and following. Sicinius and Brutus assert that they wish Coriolanus could have, quote, continued to his country as he began, and not unknit himself the noble knot he made. What does that mean exactly? I mean, do they truly mean that they wish Coriolanus could have served Rome in government as well as he did in battle? Is Volumnia right to be so angry? I don't know. Melvin, Menenius. Act 1, Scene 1, he asserts that he is a friend to the plebeians, but his fable, note that his fable, his tale of the belly, in no way addresses any of the concerns that the plebeians have. In Act 2, Scene 1, Melvin expresses his disdain for the tribunes. And it seems the, quote, beastly folk, the plebeians that the tribunes represent. This suggests that his statement earlier that the patricians would care for the plebeians was bogus, and he himself, as a patrician, does not give a damn about the plebeians. Also, Melvin asserts that the tribunes are fools. But does Melvin himself seem any wiser or any more competent or any more insightful than the tribunes? All right, guys, that's what I've got for Coriolanus. So watch this video. What a stupid thing of me to say right at the end. Look at the study guide, and if you have any questions, email me or see me during the little office hour thing on Zoom that I'm trying to do between 4 and 6 every Tuesday and Thursday. And if you get on there, if you accept the invitation and I'm not there, then send me an email, because it's entirely possible that I'll forget. Sorry. All right, that's what I've got. This was fun. I hope you're enjoying the course so far. Let me know if you have any questions. See ya.